Welcome to the theater. Take a seat, grab some popcorn, and get ready for another horror movie double bill. This is Friday Night Fratricide.
Good evening, and welcome back to Friday Night Fratricide. I need to stop introducing it, because I already do the introduction in the little theme sequence.
That's true.
I already say, like, welcome to Friday Night Fratricide.
Yeah.
So I don't really need to reintroduce it, but it feels more natural to say.
I suppose so. I can. Yeah. We've buggered ourselves.
Yeah. Well, yes, you're here with the Happy Brothers. I am Fraser.
And I am Ewan.
And we have a fun themed episode for you this week. We decided, since it's coming to the end of Pride Month, that we would do queer horror. What are you smirking at?
I thought of a really inappropriate joke, but I shouldn't. It's Pride Month. I shouldn't be making jokes.
You should be respectful.
I am very respectful of the queers.
I don't think...
Maybe I shouldn't put it like that. It's fine. I'm allowed to put it like that.
We thought since it's the end of Pride Month, we would do something to celebrate, I suppose, and show our respect and allyship and support.
Yeah,
I'm running out of words here.
Yeah,
it's
Pride Month. We're going to talk about some queer horror movies.
Yeah, why not? So we have a couple of different takes on queer horror. I think you went more for the subtextual aspect of it with the Bride of Frankenstein, and I went more very non-subtextual.
Yes,
just a horror film featuring a gay couple as the protagonists of the story.
Yes.
Neither stories are particularly cheery. Unfortunately,
no, not
I think
really.
It's maybe an unfortunate downside to horror is that even when they do include, queer characters or, other minorities or whatever, it is often they are the subject to torment and things like that. It's just a sort of it comes with the territory. Unfortunately,
horror movies with openly queer characters unfortunately fall into one of two camps. Either the queer characters are facing a lot of homophobia and often violence as a result of their queerness, which is kind of what we get in Spiral. Or on the other side, we've got films with either openly queer or queer-coded villains, which isn't always great either, because that's always a lot of people could take offense to that they're interpreting queerness as evil. So it's not great.
No, I suppose
still,
it's horror, and you kind of need to take it as that.
We're celebrating queer creators. We're not here to poke fun at the queer stories or act like we're not reveling in the homophobia that's present in the stories.
That would be very weird.
That would be
if we were we're doing a Pride episode so we can watch some gay people get beaten up.
Yeah.
Boy. That I just realised that clip could very much get taken out of context.
Yeah, we'll try not to.
Get
that taken out of context.
I always think that it always reminds me of that scene in Scooby-Doo. It just nails it perfectly.
I think Coolsville sucks.
Yeah, I think that's... No, we are here to celebrate and to appreciate, not to criticise.
Yeah.
So, which would you like to start with? Will we go with the oldie or the newie?
Do you want to start with the older one first?
Do you want to start with
Bride of Frankenstein?
Yeah, take it away.
Cool. So, this is the first time that we're covering a sequel, really. I can't think of any other that we've covered.
Yeah, I think so.
Any sequels.
Yeah.
Especially without covering the original. But everyone knows the story of Frankenstein is pretty straightforward.
I think.
And we get a recap right at the beginning of the film anyway. Henry Frankenstein, he's not called Victor in this, he's called Henry for some reason, makes a monster out of dead body parts. Then the monster comes to life and kills some people and then gets killed by the villagers. That's about it. That's pretty much the story. Bride of Frankenstein kicks off with, we get a little sort of meta element with Elsa Lanchester, who plays the Bride of Frankenstein at the end of the film, at the start playing Mary Shelley, talking with her husband Percy and Lord Byron, who is a very funny character because he's just so egotistical.
He's very,
I love that about him. And they kind of talk about, your first story was so chilling, it's a shame that you've not done any more. And she's like, well, that's not actually the end of the story. There's more that happens. Blah, blah, blah. And then that's what this is. She's continuing the story.
Yeah. It's very meta for the
it is
1930s.
For the time,
I was surprised. I was like, this is new. This is I can't imagine many films had done that kind of thing.
Probably not. No.
At that time. Yeah, I was on board. I was like, yeah, cool.
Yeah, it's nice. But then we kick off with the story properly, and it continues right where the last one left off. The big windmill that Frankenstein's monster was burned alive in has now collapsed, and everyone's standing around waiting to check that he's dead, and they can't find the body, but they're like, it's fine, he will have burned to death, and they don't realize that there's like a basement that's flooded, or like a cavern underneath the windmill, I guess, that he's fallen into and managed to survive the fire. He then kills two of the villagers who are standing around, who are the parents of the little girl that he kills in the first film.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
There's a famous scene in the first film where he kills Maria, the little girl. And that scene had to be edited out for like 50 years after the film was made. It wasn't cut back in until like the 70s.
Really?
Yeah, it was cut out for a long time because the idea of like a kid being killed was...
We've spoken about that a lot.
We have,
yeah.
But it was like really horrible at the time, obviously, the 1930s. So yeah, they had to cut it out for all of the re-releases for a really long time. But yeah, so they are standing around longer than everyone else waiting. The dad, whose name I can't remember, falls in, gets got by the monster. The monster climbs his way out, then gets the other one, and then runs off. Startles Minnie, who is insufferable. Yeah, Frankenstein's maid, Minnie, who is played by Una O'Connor, who was also in The Invisible Man.
Oh,
Have you seen The Invisible Man?
Not for a long time. I've not seen any of the Universal films for a long, long time.
Yeah, it'd been a little while since I had watched any of them. But yeah, she's also in The Invisible Man, playing a very similar character and is equally insufferable. Yeah. She's the worst.
Very screechy.
I do not know
hyperactive.
What relationship she had with James Whale that he kept putting her in films, but whatever it was, yeah, she's the worst. She just screams and shouts and is terrible. Anyway, so she then runs and is like, the monster's still alive, blah, 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 blah. We don't see the monster then again for another maybe half hour or so. There's a decent chunk where we don't really see, he goes off into the woods and we don't see him. We continue the story with Henry Frankenstein, who is startled by the whole ordeal and is sitting around waiting for something to happen, really. And his new wife, Elizabeth, is trying to convince him that they should leave and go off into the countryside and, forget this whole thing ever happened. And that's when Dr. Pretorius shows up. I love Dr. Pretorius.
He's very evil.
He's very evil, and he's so camp. He's so great. He shows up, and this is where we get the first bit of the sort of queer subtext of the film, is on his wedding night, Henry Frankenstein gets a visit from an old colleague who is male, who convinces him to go off with him so that they can create life together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Two men are going to go and create life, and your wife is going to get left behind. And that's, that's one of the big reasons that a lot of people look at this as a queer bit of cinema rather than being... Although a lot of people disagree. James Whale's life partner and also biographer, those are two separate people, have both said that they don't think there was any intentional queer subtext put in by James Whale, that it was just coincidence, but also the whole thing that he was an openly gay man even in the 1930s, so it's kind of impossible for like none of that to seep into his work, even a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of the main reason that everyone looks at this as having queer connotations, is the whole thing of Pretorius and Frankenstein kind of being a couple. They're creating life together. They have quite an intense relationship. Pretorius really hates Elizabeth, like is very, very dismissive of her, is really quite rude to her. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I don't know. I have to say, like, if I didn't know there was that subtext in the film, I don't know that I necessarily would have picked it up straight off. It's definitely noticeable when you're watching it.
Yep.
There's some of the stuff later on with the monster, and you'll get to that in a second, I'm sure, when you're showing, but the monster and his friend in the woods.
The hermit, yeah.
That was I would, for me, I would say that was more notable than Pretorius and Frankenstein.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just me.
Yeah, that is the other element, which I will get to.
I know you'll get to
but
that.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah, so the last little bit before we jump back to the monster is we get this scene where Pretorius is like, oh, I've got my workshop, come and check out my workshop, and you can see all of the experiments that I've been doing. And he's created little homunculi, I guess, little guys living in jars. He has himself created life, but in a very different way, because he's grown the tissue by himself.
Yeah.
He's not using dead body parts.
There's a little dog come to say hello.
There's a dog in the studio today.
If you hear panting, it's not you. And
it's not me.
It is the dog.
Well, it might be. It's also very hot.
It is very warm.
Yeah, so Pretorius has in his workshop, he has these jars with little people in them, and he's like, oh, well, there's a queen and a king and like an archbishop and whatever.
A mermaid as well, isn't
yeah,
there?
he makes a mermaid. And yeah, he kind of then says, we'll see if we put our work together, we can create a much better form of life, because we don't have to use impure bits of brain. But that's the thing, Frankenstein's monster's brain comes from a criminal. It was an abnormal brain, apparently.
I really like the effects in this scene. I thought they're quite
surprisingly
impressive
good for the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that was something easily wouldn't look out of place, even as far as like the 60s, 70s maybe.
Yeah.
Like, so when it, 35? What's this
35,
film?
yeah.
35. Like, I was really quite impressed. Like, that's pretty, it looked pretty good. I was trying to figure out exactly how they'd done it, but like what do you call it, like chroma keying, or I don't know how they did it in that way, the sort of green screen or whatever.
Similar thing. I don't know much about the special effects of that time. I did look it up because, again, going back to James Whale's other film, Invisible Man.
Oh, of course,
had like mind-blowing special effects at the time, and even I went back and watched it a few years ago and was just like, it's amazing that they did this in the 30s. I can't even imagine how you would begin to do this in the 30s, because we could do it now. I could do something like that now really easily, because we've got all this green screen technology, even in like free editing software you download off the internet. It would be super easy to just get a computer to do it. But they didn't have anything like that then. So it's just incredible that they managed to do that like manually, practically, by splicing the lenses together and everything, or whatever it was that they do. So this scene, it's quite silly, and it doesn't really go anywhere beyond him just being like, I have grown living tissue. Yeah. So he's kind of like, I can grow like a brain for the, for our new creature. We're gonna make a bride. We're gonna make a woman to go alongside the man that you've already made, and then I don't know. I guess they can start a new
a family together,
I suppose. I'm not entirely sure why he wants to do that, but there you go.
But he did.
But he does. So then at this point, we jump back to the monster. He's kicking about in the woods. He finds there's a woman who falls. She gets startled and falls into a lake, and he jumps in and saves her. And we don't really get that kind of humanity being shown in the monster in the first film, but we do. This is where we start to see it here, that like he's he is just trying his best, and
yeah.
everyone hates him for it because they view him as being a monster. So she's screaming and shouting even though he's just saved her life. Then 2 hunters come along and they start trying to kill him. They actually, kind of give him a beating and tie him up, and they truss him up on a big stick, and everyone gets together and carries him into town, and they chuck him in a dungeon. And this is the other subtext that we've got in this film, is that there's a lot of sort of religious iconography going on. And the scene when he gets tied up and pulled up, it's like he's being crucified. And a lot of people think of that as probably being more intentional rather than the queer subtext, is this sort of religious angle that he's like a kind of a bastardization of Christ, in the sense that if Frankenstein is playing God by creating life, then his son would be the monster. So
I guess I never really thought about that, but yeah, it does make sense.
And there's a whole thing about, because he was dead and then comes back to life, and then is brought back to life when Frankenstein creates the monster, only to die again at the end of the film. It's kind of like a reversal of Jesus Christ being alive, dying, and then being resurrected. It's like an inverse of that. It's like a kind of bastardization, which is interesting.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know exactly how much you can read into all of that, or how much of this is just almost 100 years on. Lots of people have written essays about it and just made a bunch of stuff up.
Like on the surface, I guess it makes sense, but I'm not really sure where, like, how deep it really goes.
Yeah.
What, I mean, Jesus Christ was the savior of all mankind. Is Frankenstein's monster the killer of all mankind? Like, I don't really see him like that, you know? He's just a poor chap who wants to be loved.
He's just a guy. He's just a dude, you know. But yeah, he gets taken into town. He's tied up. Presumably, they're gonna execute him, I guess. But he manages to escape, breaks out, runs away, runs back into the woods, and at this point, manages to find a house where he hides. And there's an old hermit living there, playing the violin. Yeah. And when he realizes that the monster is there, kind of says like, "Are you there? I can't see you. I'm blind." And at that point, they bond with each other, I suppose, because they don't, because the hermit can't see him, does not have this prejudice against him, and therefore is willing to accept him, and the two of them become friends, and he starts to teach him how to talk, and he gives him food and teaches him how to smoke
a fat dude together,
teaches him how to smoke and drink wine, and yeah, it's pretty great. And also they have wine and bread, and that, you know, that's another religious thing, another bit of religious stuff there. And it's really very sweet. And there's a whole thing about how, you know, he's really lonely and he hates that he's alone, and now God has brought him a friend, and there's a very sweet scene when he tucks the monster into bed, and he's like, "Oh, thank you, God, for finally bringing me a friend so that I'm not lonely anymore." And they both have a little cry, and it's very sweet. And then there's a crucifix in the background that glows for a bit, which is a bit okay. It's a bit cheesy, but it's sweet. It's sweet. And then it all goes a bit tits up, really, because after, I suppose, a couple of days, presumably, he kind of starts to
he teaches Frankenstein. He teaches the monster to talk, which I imagine probably wasn't a quick process.
I don't know.
Like, I got the impression that it was a couple of weeks or something.
Yeah.
But I guess, I don't know.
I think, they don't explicitly say one way or the other. I kind of imagined it would make sense if it was just... even if it was just overnight, because it is like a fully formed brain that he's got. He just doesn't have any memories, really. So I suppose it would make sense then, I guess, in that context, if he was able to learn faster.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe. I don't know. And yeah, then the hunters show back up and they burn the house down, and we don't see the hermit again after that, but they may well have killed him. We don't know.
They kind of just usher him away. They don't really seem too hostile against him.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, we're going to save you from the monster. And he's like, no, it's my friend.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh.
Yeah, it's nice. And they chase the monster out. He runs out. He manages to hide in a crypt, which is where he then runs into Dr. Pretorius, and the two of them converse for a little bit, and he's kind of saying, like, you know who you are, you know who Frankenstein is, and he's like, the monster's showing this recognition of like, yeah, he made me and out of dead bits, and I don't like being alive sucks. I wish I was still dead.
He's in his teenager stage.
He is, yeah. And he is then like, right, well, I'm gonna make you a bride so that you're not lonely. I'm gonna make a woman for you, and then but you need to help me do it. We're gonna convince Frankenstein that he needs to help me do it by kidnapping his wife, basically.
I mean, it's pretty convincing.
Yeah, it is pretty convincing. So they kidnap Elizabeth. The Frankenstein sees the monster again for the first time, and they have a brief little chat where Pretorius is like, no, he's my friend now, and he's learned how to talk, and I've shown him I've educated him even further, and now he's gonna help us. We're gonna work together, and we're gonna make him a bride. And then we get this big final scene. We get all of the usual Frankenstein-y stuff with the Tesla coils and the kites flying into the sky to catch the lightning and the whole "it's alive" thing.
Yeah.
But this time they're making a woman. They've got a bride played by Elsa Lanchester again, and then she hates the monster. She like screams in disgust when she sees him for the first time, and refuses to be anywhere near him. And at that point, the monster realizes, like, nope, I'm like, there's no making a mate for me. I am a monster, and so is she. Like, we're not supposed to be alive. Gets Frankenstein and Elizabeth to leave. He lets them leave, but insists that Pretorius and the bride stay, and he blows the lab up.
Yep.
And kills them all, and that's pretty much the end of the film. He has this great line at the end when he says, "We belong dead," and kills them. And I thought that was very sweet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not sweet, but it's
not. Yeah.
It's a nice. I don't know. It's a nice ending.
Is it though?
I don't love the ending because I find it very anticlimactic, but I like that scene. I like him having this recognition, as much as it's depressing that he kills himself.
Yeah.
That recognition of him, like, realizing, he has this moment of realization of what he is and his place in the world.
Yeah,
as
the
like,
acknowledgement.
He isn't really supposed to exist.
Yeah.
You know, he's not just a monster. He's taking action in his own existence. And that, unfortunately, means killing himself and also killing Pretorius and the bride. But there you go.
So, I have many problems with this film.
Yeah.
Right. So, I can't remember the last time I watched Frankenstein. It has been a long time. But obviously, you know the story. It's been retold in dozens of other films.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And books and whatever else. Everyone knows the story of Frankenstein. So I didn't feel like I was going into it completely fresh. I didn't feel like I needed to watch the original again.
Yep.
But at the end of it, I felt like I maybe should have, to see if it was as bad as this.
Wow. There are people who say that this is the best horror film of all time.
Yeah, and I have to know what on earth they're smoking.
Wow.
Because I did not get it at all.
No?
So I have a lot of appreciation for the film.
Mm-hmm.
For its time, it was very well made. The acting in it was kind of par for the course. Like, it was fine for the time. Karloff's like great, but he's not spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
The film is a tight 70 minutes.
Yep.
Right? It's a very short film. And a solid, like, 30 minutes in the middle of the film, maybe, is Frankenstein having a chit-chat with the Hermit Man.
Yeah.
and it doesn't go anywhere. There was no consequence to that at all.
He's learning his humanity.
But we already know he has humanity because he saves the girl at the start.
But he's, alone bad, friend good.
But like, I don't know. I had issues with the pacing of the film. I thought it felt very disjointed. It felt like it was this, like, it kicks off and that's all fine. And then we had like you say, like a good 20 minutes of Frankenstein and Pretorius chatting, and then half an hour of Frankenstein and the Hermit, and then like 10 minutes to wrap it up at the end. It felt like there should be more back and forward between the two stories.
Probably. Rather
than like a block of this and then a block of that, and then, there's a resolution.
Yep.
Also, the film's called The Bride of Frankenstein. The Bride of Frankenstein is in it for all of 4 minutes at the end of the film.
Yeah.
And I don't know what I was expecting, but I guess I assumed it would be more he creates the bride and then there's all this sort of story between the monster and the bride, and how do two monsters find love, and can they find love when they're both creatures of death? But that's all like wrapped up in this like 1 minute bit of dialogue at the end.
Yeah.
And then it just ends and they all die. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
I don't know. I like, maybe it's my fault for setting my expectations too high, but I didn't vibe with it at all.
Fair enough.
I loved that we got Mary Shelley and Lord Byron and Percy. I thought that was really clever, the way that they were doing that, as if they were telling the story. But all it does is introduces the film. And it's never heard from again. They don't even wrap up the film.
Yeah.
With like Mary Shelley saying, and that's the story.
Yeah.
Which was like, why bother then? If you're just going to... It might as well have been like a blank introduction. Just like a narrator saying, and here's the story continued.
Yeah.
This is the Bride of Frankenstein. It might as well have just been that. It was just completely wasted.
That's pretty much how the first film opens.
Well, yeah. But like... I don't know.
Yeah.
I would have liked, or halfway through the film, it sort of cuts back to Lord Byron being like, what are you doing with this story? This is incredible. And sort of more interaction with more of a meta commentary on it.
Yeah.
I would have liked that, but I don't know. It didn't work for me.
Didn't work for you.
It didn't work for me. And I read up afterwards and was like, this is widely considered as the best horror sequel of all time. And I was like, are you insane?
No.
Who has ever said that?
That's a bit of a wild statement, but this is like a beloved film, and I understand why. I really like it.
Please tell me why, because I have to understand.
I love the style of it. I love the characters. I like the plot generally. I agree that it's not particularly well paced. There's stuff of like, the monster at the beginning, he's alive, and then he goes into the village, and then he goes into the woods, and then he gets chased out of the woods, and then he gets put back in the village, and then he breaks out of the village, and he goes back into the woods, and then he goes out of the woods, and he goes back into the village again. And it's like, it definitely isn't paced particularly well. Yeah. But generally, I like a lot of the stuff that they do plot-wise. I like the dialogue. I think it's got some good dialogue.
Friend good.
Alone bad, friend good. Smoke
good.
But I think like even just like individual lines kind of come across as like, I don't know, poetry, like in a way that people don't really like write dialogue like that now. There's stuff like, Pretorius saying like, welcome to a new world of gods and monsters or whatever. Like no one would ever actually talk like that, but it has this, nice sort of ethereal quality to it, I guess. I don't know.
So one question, is The Bride of Frankenstein a book?
No. But the concept of Frankenstein creating a bride for the monster was in the original book.
Right, okay.
That was kind of like the second half.
Right.
So like after the monster is created and leaves and then becomes kind of educated and learns how to talk and becomes more of like his own person, comes back to Frankenstein and is like, I want you to make me a bride so that I'm not going to be alone. And then Frankenstein does make the bride, but then immediately kills her because he's like, as soon as he does it, it's like, no, I can't do this. It's gonna then create like a race of monsters, and like I can't let that happen. So kills her.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say it didn't. I don't know. It didn't have that feeling of like an adaptation.
Yeah.
It had it did. It didn't feel like it was being directly adapted from a book. It felt like they were taking a bit of liberty.
Yeah, definitely.
And it had that feeling. Like,
Like,
you know, when they take like a chapter from a book and turn it into a whole film.
mm-hmm.
It had that feeling.
Yeah.
So if they actually did that, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But otherwise, yeah, these two films kind of back to back pretty much roughly tells the story of the book, but with a lot of stuff cut out and a lot of new stuff added in, and like, yeah.
Okay.
So the concept of the bride was in the book, but not even slightly told in the same way.
Okay.
Yeah. Wait.
Oh well.
Have you seen Mary Shelley's Frankenstein?
I have not.
With Kenneth Branagh.
I was away to say I didn't. I knew it existed, but I
Yeah.
never really looked into it at all. I don't know, like Robert De Niro plays
De
the
Niro
monster.
plays the monster. Yeah.
What? I think I need to see this film.
Yeah. It's not amazing.
Is it not a closer
It's okay.
adaptation to the book?
Yeah.
They
It's
yeah.
that's what I was going to say. It's like definitely more of an accurate adaptation of the book. I'm not much of an expert of the book. I've not read it, all of it. I've read like a simplified version of it for some reason in high school. We were given so I think it was like Michael Morpurgo wrote like a short story version of it that kind of tells the same story. And then I read chunks of the original, but I've not actually read all of it.
Fair enough.
But yeah, it's like more accurate to that style. It's okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, what did you give it? Shall we give it a ranking?
I gave it a 1.5 out of 5.
1.5.
Because I don't want to be too critical on it. I mean, I am critical on it, but I don't want to be too harsh because I do appreciate for its time, it's gonna have issues. Like, film's been around a long time. It's taken a while to get things right, and there's a lot of good has come out of films like these where they're pushing boundaries and, you know, actually making an effort to do something a bit new and fresh.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't hate it. I just didn't really vibe with it. And as I say, like all the technical stuff in the film, the special effects and like the makeup and stuff is great. Like throughout is amazing. The set design is like all these huge rooms in the castle, and it's like the wood, even the woods, like you can tell that it's a set, but there's something really just kind of charming and quaint about how it's done. So I gotta give it points for that. But I really just, the pacing of the film bothered me. It just felt really, some scenes were stretched out too long and other ones weren't long enough. The whole idea of it being the Bride of Frankenstein and having the bride be in the film for like a couple of minutes bugged me because I felt like there was more story. They could have done more with that end scene. The whole third act could have been that last scene, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I have issues. Yeah. But I appreciate it. I just don't want to watch it again.
Yeah. No, that's fair enough.
I imagine you were more favorable towards it.
Yeah, I don't absolutely love it, but I do very much enjoy it. I had a really good time watching it. I had a really good time reading about it. It really made me want to go and watch Gods and Monsters with Ian McKellen.
Oh yeah,
the film. Yeah. It's about James Whale, like in the 50s after he's retired. But there's like bits of it which is kind of telling the story of the production of this film.
Oh really?
Like sort of like fictionalized behind the scenes stuff about him making the film.
That's Brendan Fraser in that one as well.
Brendan Fraser's in it. Yeah, it's Brendan Fraser plays his gardener, and they kind of form a friendship / romance. I need to go and watch it. Like I think a lot of it just kind of comes from like the aesthetic and the iconography of like the monster and the bride and the woods and the Tesla coils in the lab and everything. I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff, so I just really enjoy watching the film and just letting it unfold. There are aspects of it that I don't love. Like the whole thing with the hermit, I think generally is very sweet, but it's a bit played up. The scene when they're like sitting and they're having a cry and the crucifix starts glowing and Ave Maria's playing in the background, I'm like, okay, it's a little schmaltzy. Like I enjoy the scene. I think they just go a little bit too far with it. And yeah, it does have pacing issues. Absolutely, I agree. Una O'Connor is absolutely insufferable. Yeah, it has its ups and downs, but overall, I have a really good time watching it. Okay. I gave it 3.5.
3.5. Okay.
Yeah,
and it's whether or not there is that queer subtext underneath the film, it's definitely been adopted as one of those films that is sort of iconic for that kind of thing, whether it was intentional or not. Mm-hmm. So you got to give it points for that as well, I suppose.
Yeah.
And the fact that an openly gay man in the 1930s directed a film that's this well critically received.
Yep. Yeah.
Regardless of whether or not I enjoyed it, the fact that it is considered to be such a good film is pretty important in the history of like queer cinema. Yeah, absolutely. Plus two of the main actors, Colin Clive and Ernest Thesiger, who played Frankenstein and Pretorius, were both like not openly because it was the 30s, so there's a whole thing. They weren't openly gay; they were known to be gay, and there is a distinction there. There is, because at the time, obviously, it was very different as it is now. Yeah, I think that's probably part of the reason that a lot of people want to read into the queerness of it, is because it has like three of the central figures of the film, of James Whale and Colin Clive and Ernest Thesiger, all being gay. Or I think Colin Clive might have been bisexual, possibly. I think there's like speculation. Again, because we don't really know, because at the time people sort of speculate one way or the other. But well, actually, one thing I did note down, and I'd made the comment in jest, but obviously the whole thing with Lord Byron and Mary Shelley and other Shelley, Percy Shelley, thank you. There's a whole lot of discussion going on about what they were up to. Oh yeah, they were in that big old castle, so there's sort of that aspect to it as well. Because there was the other one that was with them at I don't know if the castle that they're in at the beginning, if that's supposed to be the Villa Diodati, where the famous story of when they wrote Frankenstein, they were like, oh, it's a scary night, why don't we all write stories? Byron and the fourth person that was with them, Polidori, the two of them had a bit of a romance. Right. And there was like the story that was written by Byron at the time, which was called Vampire, was then adapted later and was one of the big inspirations for Dracula. And there's I can't remember exactly because it was very complicated, but there was a documentary that Mark Gatiss did where he talked about this sort of chain of events throughout the 1800s of all these writers who were all gay with each other, and how Dracula like passed from one person to the other until eventually Bram Stoker wrote it in like the 1890s. Yeah, like everyone that wears there was absolutely queer. Do you know that Mary Shelley lost her virginity on top of her mum's grave? I did know that. Yeah. Good for her. Yeah. That's wild. What a goth. What a goth thing to do. That's so goth. Or at least rumoured to. It's probably not true. It's probably honestly made up. Wouldn't be surprised. I would believe it, definitely. Yeah. There's a reason that it's so believable. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, that was Bride of Frankenstein. Yeah. That was that was a film. That sure was a film. I think whether you like it or not, you have to think that it's definitely worth watching. That's the thing. Even though I gave it a low score and I didn't enjoy it, I do still very much appreciate what it has done for horror, specifically queer horror, and I would recommend you give it a watch and see what you think. Yep. It is yeah. Yep. Yeah, you're right. So, from the 1930s, we go right up to 2019. We have a Shudder original, I feel like we want to plug Shudder as much as we can. We can get that sponsorship at some
Get
point.
some sponsorship money from Shudder.
I'd love that.
I do love Shudder.
I love Shudder, man. It's full of just fun films.
And all for the low price of $5.99 a month.
Yeah, now you're getting it. Now you're getting it. So, second film of the evening, we have Spiral, directed by Curtis David Harder. It takes place in the mid-90s in, I think it was Illinois. I can't remember exactly where it's set.
Could be. It was made in Canada.
Oh, actually, no. Why did I think Illinois?
I don't know. Yeah,
I think it is actually set in Canada. I think you're right. Set in the middle of somewhere in North America. Yep. It's a small town. Same-sex couple, Malik and Aaron, and their daughter. Well, Aaron's daughter, and it's Malik's stepdaughter, I guess. I don't know if they wouldn't be married. They wouldn't.
No, they're not married. But they're partners.
They're together, and they seem to be pretty. They have been together for a while. They are a family, and they move to this little town. Malik's a writer. He does like biographies. He's writing a biography on some horrible religious figure. It doesn't really go into detail on who he is.
Yeah, not really. Some homophobic arsehole who talks about the sanctity of the traditional family unit, and
it's sort of added just a bit of visual sort of side plot to emphasize how horrible some people are towards same-sex couples and things like that. And Aaron, I can't remember what job he does. He works somewhere. Yeah,
he's not at home.
They have moved for a reason, and he's working in this town somewhere. I don't know. But it's a very small town, close-knit community. They're quote-unquote welcomed by the neighbours. They seem very strange, that this couple that live next door. I can't remember their names. Marshall and Katie or something. Mm-hmm. I didn't write down all the names. It's not important. They're
very Republican.
Like 100%.
Incredibly Republican 100%. Couple, like proper like WASP couple.
And they're very like, oh yeah, well I think it's great, and I think it's so horrible how you people are treated, and it's that kind of underhanded homophobia towards them. And then their son, son forms a relationship with Kayla, the daughter, and they go off and do their own thing. She manages to get a job at the local restaurant, but she starts skipping out to spend time with the son. I didn't write down the son's name.
No, I can't remember.
The creepy, handsome son.
Him and then there's an older guy that also lives there.
An older guy
who has his grandson is living with him, I guess, or is around. Yeah. And it took me until maybe halfway into the film before I realized that the old guy's grandson and the couple's son were not the same person.
Yeah, they've both got.
They look very similar.
Yeah.
They are the most generic white boy in the planet. And I saw them, and it genuinely, there's a scene where it like cuts from one to the other, and you realize that they don't have exactly the same haircut. And I was like, oh my God, they aren't the same person. Yeah. Those are two different people.
Very similar. Very similar. So the plot is basically that Malik is struggling to integrate with the town. He feels like the focus is very much on him and Aaron. He feels like the neighbours aren't particularly kind to him. And he feels like they are actually openly like hostile towards the family. There's the old neighbor, the old guy, he kind of pops up in the background here and there, and then one night he turns up in the house, the alarm goes off, and Malik chases him out the house, and he hands him a bit of paper, this blank bit of paper, and then mysteriously he dies the next day. Along with Malik seeing through the curtains, it is that night, isn't it? Yeah, he sees this sort of ritual thing going on in Marshall and someone's house. Or no, Marshall's leading it, but I think it is in the old guy's house. And they're doing this sort of weird chant, and they're all holding hands and whatever. And from there on, Malik starts to kind of lose his mind. He's just gradually, it's interesting the way that it's shot and the way that the story kind of plays out. You're not really sure if what he's seeing is real or if it is him losing his mind. You see him sort of taking pills to calm down and whatever. I don't know if he's got migraines or whatever. And you're not really sure what you're seeing is real or not.
Yeah.
And I really liked how that played into the horror of it. So playing it out like it was a subjective horror film, like we were watching it from the point of Malik and Aaron to an extent, that there are these people in the world who are hostile towards gay folk.
Yep.
And it was really unsettling. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I found it quite a difficult watch.
Yeah.
Especially like the first half of the film. I think when I realised, we are watching this from his point of view, and all the people like staring at him as he goes out for a walk, and the sort of fake friendship from the neighbours and things like that. Like, it was just, I don't know, it was sad and
it is
difficult to
It is a bit
stomach.
upsetting. And that's part of the reason that I was a bit worried going into the film at all, is because like I don't really like watching films that are just like, hey, look at this real world horrible thing that happens.
Yeah.
Like, it makes me very anxious and I don't really enjoy watching them.
So it definitely, the first half of the film kind of plays that up quite a lot.
Yeah.
And then as it starts to settle down a bit and we start to find out that there is something sinister going on with the town, Malik finds out that the bit of paper the old guy gave him isn't actually blank and it has numbers on it, leading to newspaper articles of, I think it's every 10 years there is a couple. I think it's implied to be a gay couple, but I found that kind of hard to believe that it's conveniently every 10 years there's a gay couple moves to town.
Yeah, it's not always a gay couple.
Yeah.
Because at the end we
find out that it's not. It's just
we can get to that once we explain what's actually going on.
He finds the newspaper articles. There are, most recently, 10 years prior, there was a woman and her partner and their daughter moved into the house that Malik and Aaron are living in now, and they were murdered. There was a murder-suicide. So one of the mothers killed the daughter and then themselves and the other partner. They all died, basically.
Yep.
So he's starting to lose it more and more. Malik's worried that there is some sort of conspiracy going on. There's, something's going on. Marshall, the neighbour, has like these weird books, and he has like a painting in the house of their son from like the 1800s, and he looks exactly the same as he does now.
He says that it's like his great-grandfather or something, but it's like very clearly his son.
Yeah, and it
could just be another generic white boy.
It very well could be.
They're like, he looks so similar, and it's like, yeah, like 90% of white men in Canada look like that.
And yeah, things just spiral. They start to spiral. And Malik gets worse and worse. He starts to lose time. He's, taking a shower, and it turns out he's been there for like 2 hours. He has a conversation with the grandson of the old guy who died, and he's sort of having a chat, and the grandson's kind of being really creepy towards him and starts like kissing his neck and being really strange. And then we find out later that during that time that they were together, he lost time, and there's photos of Malik like tied up in like BDSM gear, and the grandson like kissing him and stuff, which obviously drives a wedge between him and Aaron. And after they separate, Malik decides he needs to get to the bottom of it. He goes to the house of the other couple. Oh no, actually, yeah, because the house that they lived in wasn't the same house, was it?
It wasn't the same house.
No. Why did I think... Oh, it's because the couple at the end of the film move into the same house, I assumed. Yeah, but it's not, because there's the abandoned house. Mm-hmm. He goes in and he kind of sees the ghost of one of the couple who was murdered, and she hands him a bunch of tapes with some footage on it of basically things that the family were that his family were also doing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he decides that, basically Marshall and his family are doing some sort of ritual, and they are killing the families that come here. He decides that they are the ones that the whole town's in on it, and everyone's against him. And he marches back to the house after taking pills and having a bit of a breakdown in the motel. He marches back to the house and he shoots Marshall in the chest.
Yep.
And everyone, like, what have you just done? And Marshall dies, and like the whole film kind of falls flat, and you're like, oh shit, he's actually crazy.
Yeah.
It's all against him. And and I was kind of, when this happened, I was really disappointed. I was like, oh, they are actually going with the angle that he is just crazy and everyone's against him. And there's this sort of flashback sequence with him when he was younger. Him and his boyfriend at the time, he watched his boyfriend get beaten to death because they were making out in the back of a car. Very upsetting.
Yep.
But you kind of realize, he's been talking to presumably it was his partner that died on the phone. And then he can't get a hold of him, and you realize, like, oh shit, he's in jail now. He is insane. Like, Malik has just lost his mind.
Yeah.
And so Aaron comes to see him, and he's like, you've lost it. Don't know what you're doing. I'm taking Kayla and I'm leaving. And he goes home and he sticks in the videotape, and I'm realizing now that I can't remember what's actually on the videotape. He's watching it, and he sees the son, doesn't he?
He sees the it's like they're having a party outside, like a garden party, which is exactly like the one that they went to,
the sort of bonfire,
kind of 20 minutes into the film or whatever, like a big bonfire. And he realizes that was 10 years ago, but Marshall and his wife and the son look exactly the same.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, there is something creepy going on. And then it cuts around.
It pans around, and all these hooded figures
standing behind him,
standing in the living room.
I like that shot.
That was nice, yeah. So he runs to Kayla's room, and the door's locked, and he can't get in. And he eventually, like, kicks the door in. Oh no, the door opens behind him, and he opens the door, and it, like, jaw-dropping scene. Like, I was like, what the fuck? Shooked. I was properly shooked. Of Kayla lying on the bed with her chest, like, ripped open, and Marshall's son sitting there, like, eating her heart. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, at least we're not going with the Malik was crazy angle. There is actually something to it. But holy shit, okay. So, I mean, she's obviously dead. And then the mum comes in and is like, all, oh, isn't our son so wonderful, and blah, blah, blah. And it's just really unsettling and weird. And you realise that Aaron's about to die.
He's going to get killed.
And cut back to the jail with Malik kind of sitting and crying. And Marshall walks in, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, cool. Okay, so this, yeah, fine.
Yeah.
And we realise that, yeah, Malik is going to be framed for their death, and the family is going to go on doing this for all eternity. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, there's the spiral. There's the continuing spiral all the way down. And I was really sad that they died, because I really quite liked Malik as a character.
Yeah.
I thought he was great, and I liked his, just as he went on, his sort of fervor, and yeah, I don't know, I liked it.
Yeah.
And I was really sad to see them all die and the villains win. And then we have this sort of epilogue set 10 years later. There's this young South Asian
couple.
I don't know exactly. It doesn't specify.
I would have guessed that they were Sikh. I'm not entirely sure.
The father of the family is wearing a turban, so yeah, possibly Sikh, but obviously a minority moving into this town, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah. I see where this is going. It's going to happen again. And then we see it kind of intercuts with Malik writing down everything that's happened to him and storing it on a CD, and then we see the little girl of the family. It's two parents and a daughter, the same as it always is. and we see her exploring the house, and she goes up into the attic and she finds the CD with all this detail on it, and Malik says something then like, and I hope that somehow I will break the cycle by telling you all this details, and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
So there is hope for this young family that have moved into the town. And that's how the film ends.
Yeah.
I quite liked it.
Yeah.
I didn't love it.
Yeah.
It wasn't the best film I've ever seen.
I was impressed by aspects of it, but overall I found it pretty underwhelming.
Okay.
Unfortunately. Generally, I didn't think it made an awful lot of sense.
Really?
I think obviously there was like this sort of psychological aspect of like, because we're seeing it from Malik's perspective and he's losing his mind, there were elements that while the film was unfolding, I was like there's a scene when he finds the videotapes, he goes to this couple's house and he sees like a ghost of the woman, and then he sees it again when he's in like his hotel room, and I was like, there's a ghost as well, like, and then it was like the aspect of like, are they a cult in the supernatural sense, or are they just like all crazy and homophobic, like what's going on? But even like once the film finished, I was like, so the whole point is that they're trying to lure the couple in. The couple at the end, we should point out, are straight. It's a man and a woman and their daughter. But they talk about like, oh yeah, we're not killing you because you're gay. We're killing you because we need to kill somebody, and because you're gay, no one's gonna care.
Yeah.
Basically. Like, we can get away with killing you because you're a minority and no one's gonna bother looking into it. Everyone's just gonna go, oh well, whatever. Yeah. And forget about it. Which, it like makes sense, but kind of bugged me in that it's like sort of taking away from the queerness of the film. That they're like, oh yeah, but the fact that they're queer doesn't actually factor into it that much, really. Like it does, but it also doesn't. But then it didn't make sense that they were being so openly like, oh, we're so cool with gay people. Like, it's such a shame what happens to you guys. And then, but shortly into the film, not long after they arrive, Malik goes out for a run, and then when he comes back, he finds that someone's broken into his house and has spray painted a slur on the wall.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until after I finished the film that I was like, that doesn't make any sense. They're trying to get them to stay so that they can do this ritual and kill them and keep them alive. Why would they then be trying to drive them out before that with homophobic slurs? They're trying to welcome them. So why are they trying to welcome them and then also trying to drive them away?
I have a theory about that.
Yeah.
It wasn't them that spray painted the word.
Right.
It was the old man who was trying to drive them away.
That would make sense.
Because the same thing happened to the
but that was
female
like,
couple 10
yeah, but that
years
was
ago.
like his daughters. Or like his daughter and... Was it not?
No.
I thought it was.
No. He
was like related to that couple, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't. But there was a photo of him getting along with them.
Yeah.
And being friendly with them. So my theory was that he was actually trying to save them. Because he knew what was going on with the town. So he spray painted the words trying to get them to leave. Trying to intimidate them to leave without giving the whole plot away.
Yeah. Maybe.
And then couldn't save them. And that's why he gave Malik the note later on as well.
Maybe. That just kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Either way, I just didn't necessarily get that.
That's fair enough.
And something that I might sound like a little bit of a hypocrite when I'm criticizing this because I'm also doing the exact same thing, but it bugged me that the film was a bit sanitized in that they don't explicitly show the slur that's on the wall. And there's a scene when he's on the phone with Liam, his ex-boyfriend, and he goes to say it and then is interrupted, and it showed like the film isn't willing to say the word out loud. And that kind of bugged me.
But it does show it later on.
Yeah, but like
that confused me.
They're clearly kind of dancing around saying it, which I found kind of annoying.
Yeah.
Because I think that sort of takes away from the the realness of it and the horror of it if you don't actually show stuff like that. But again, like I'm saying, I sound like a bit of a hypocrite because I'm not willing to say that word on a podcast.
I absolutely wouldn't say either. But what I mean, what confused me with it was that they seemed like that's the angle they were going for, that they didn't want to include that word in the film.
Yeah.
And I was like, if you don't want to include it, that's fair enough. If that's the line that you're drawing making the film, then fair enough, like I get it. But then they did show it later on.
Yeah.
When he's watching back the footage, you do see the word spray painted. I was like, but you've just shown it there.
Yeah.
Why not show it at the start as well?
Yeah.
That confused me.
Yeah.
So I see what you're saying. Like, it just seemed a bit inconsistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did like one thing that I did kind of like about that is that the shot where the scene when this happens, Malik arrives back at the house and you see just like the shot of his face and he obviously just looks suddenly very distraught and very upset. And then it cuts to behind him and it's actually his body that's obscuring the word. You see the first and the last letter and you can tell obviously what's written.
Yeah.
But without showing it explicitly. And that was very effective. And I did think it was very well shot. And I think the film overall I thought was stylistically very nice.
It was pretty
very good cinematography right the way through.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I kind of liked the bait and switch with Malik and whether or not he is actually going insane. I kind of took this. Well, there's a scene where he's in the motel room and you realise that his meds have been switched.
Yeah.
So I took it that the reason he is starting to lose his mind and go a bit hysterical is because his meds have been switched by the town and he is kind of actually losing it. So when he's seeing the ghosts and stuff, they aren't actually real, but he, like when the ghost hands him the videotapes, he's actually gone up to the attic and picked up the videotapes, but in his head, he's seen that the ghosts have handed them. And that's kind of what we're seeing. So I didn't hate that too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked how it does shock you when he shoots Marshall and then you're like, for 5 minutes or so, you're like, oh shit, he is actually just lost his mind.
Yeah.
And then they kind of wrap it all up and it was nice. Yeah, I don't know. I quite enjoyed it. I thought it's definitely not the worst. Of ritualistic small town horror film I've seen.
Yeah. And I think as far as like queer horror goes and supporting films, especially from the past however many years being made by queer creators, I think this is you could do a lot worse than this, frankly. Generally speaking, part of the reason that I didn't like it that much is because the premise overall felt to me very much like someone just kind of watched Get Out and then was just like, oh man, what if we did Get Out, but it was about gay people? And I'm like, like there's definitely a lot in common. And unfortunately that causes you to compare it with Get Out, which is frankly just a much better film.
Yeah.
And I think that makes Spiral look a lot worse. It's not bad, it's not...
By comparison, it's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is unfortunately kind of underwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
So what did you rank it?
I gave it 2 stars.
2 spirals out of 5.
2 spirals. It was, perfectly fine. I would probably recommend you give it a go. It's just not... It's not mind-blowing. I think there's a reason that it's not become... Like, I hadn't heard of it before. I think there's a reason that it's not become particularly well-known or particularly notable. It's not got an awful lot going for it that's that great. The performance by the actor playing Malik,
Jeffrey Bowyer Chapman.
Yeah. I thought was really good. I thought he was really
definitely
good
a
in
standout.
And like I say, the cinematography I thought was really good. I think the concept overall of like gay couple shows up in a small town and then there's weird culty stuff going on, there's a lot you can do to run with that. Like, it's maybe not the most unique premise in the world, but there's a lot that you can do with that.
Yeah.
And I think they didn't do a bad job living up to that premise. Just, it's not, as far as like cult films go, or like cult in the sense of films about cults, not like
I know what you mean.
cult
I know what you
status.
mean.
Yeah, it's not going to break any records, but it was okay.
Yeah, I think it does a fine job. I gave it 3.5 stars.
Okay.
So I did quite enjoy it. I thought the horror elements were not mind-blowing, but when you frame it in the way that I assume they were trying to frame it, from the point of view of Malik and Aaron, and kind of framing it as the subjective horror, as this is what these people are subjected to in this small town. Everyone's got eyes on them. They feel like they're being watched all the time. I really quite liked that angle.
Yeah.
And I thought that's something I've not really seen much, but not really seen done much before. I'm sure it has been done elsewhere. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. But I think that's kind of where, like, the obvious comparison is Get Out, right? Came out around the same time, similar sort of premise, but Get Out, I don't think frames it quite in the same way.
No.
The horror elements come from a very real place. Whereas here, it was objectively... It wasn't objective, sorry. It was being framed subjectively from the point of view of this couple.
Yeah.
Whereas Get Out, even though we were following... what's the character's name? Chris. It's been a while. Following Chris's character, the horror elements were kind of... They were more... I don't know how to describe it.
No.
I didn't feel like I was watching it from his point of view. They felt more real.
Yeah.
The horror elements, like the horror with the gardener and the mother hypnotizing him, things like that felt very real. It didn't feel like it was him experiencing some... If that makes sense.
There's no
like
ambiguity as to whether it's real or not. I see what you mean.
Yeah. Whereas here, it was more... It was more from their point of view, which I really liked.
One of the things that I think, not to really drive home the comparison between this film and Get Out, one of the things that I really liked about Get Out that I feel was missing from this is that there wasn't really an awful lot of subtlety to the discrimination that is being shown. In that, like, one of the things that Get Out
That's
gets
true.
praised for a lot is that it doesn't really show an awful lot of, like, overt people actively being like, I hate you because you are black. It's
I
a
voted
lot
for
of
Obama, you know.
It's microaggressions.
Yeah.
It's this, like, treating him differently, or like asking for his ID when he wasn't driving, or like just it's like
it didn't really have much of that. I know
it's
what you
the
mean.
little things, and Spiral doesn't have that. Like, the only things that you really see Malik's ex-boyfriend getting murdered, and you get, like, someone breaks into his house and spray paints a slur on his wall, and it's like, it's not that these things don't happen in the real world, it's that these are much more extreme examples, so it doesn't feel as real watching it, which I think detracts from it a little bit.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And I agree with you, actually. I think even when we have the sort of meeting at the barbecue, at the bonfire, and round at the neighbour's house and stuff, there's not really the same level of, like microaggressions. Yeah. Like that kind of subtle aspect of it. They don't really focus on that too much. Yeah. So, yeah, actually, you're right. I think if they'd had more of that, it might have been a bit better. But no, I still enjoyed it. I still think it was...
I did. Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. Impressive in places. Overall, I didn't love the structure of the story, and yeah, it was fine.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Couple of fine films. And that is our queer horror.
Yeah.
For the week. Pride is over, or about to be over.
Yeah.
And we should have thought of something. What could July be? I don't know what July is.
I don't know.
Is July any?
Well, Gay Pride Month is over, so now it's Gay Wrath Month.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So we're going for revenge horror next week then?
For revenge horror. I don't want to do a revenge horror.
No, revenge horror is difficult. It's hard to watch.
Yeah.
No, next week we have, thanks to Ewan and a convenient randomizer, we have proto slashers.
Yeah.
You had to explain to me what that was.
Yeah. So I'm thinking of films that are like, because slashers didn't really become a sort of subgenre really until basically until Halloween. Halloween, Friday the 13th, early 80s, there's this huge boom, and that's when slashers really became their own thing. But there are lots of films before that, from the sort of mid-70s and earlier, that fit a lot of the tropes of slasher films. I thought it'd be interesting to explore some of those and talk about how they have kind of shaped the slasher genre as it became later on.
So I think we've got a couple of more well-known films.
Yeah.
Neither of which I've seen the whole way through. What have you got for us this week?
So I'm picking one that some people will refer to as the first slasher film ever. I mean, arguably, because I'm saying, slashers weren't really a thing yet, but I'm going with Peeping Tom.
Okay.
From the late 50s. 59, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've gone with a much more on the nose,
and
I'm going with the original Psycho.
Yeah. Very exciting.
I could have put a twist on it. We should have gone with the Vince Vaughn 1990 Psycho.
Oh, boy.
No. We'll go with the original. So yeah, I've not seen Peeping Tom.
No, neither have I.
And I've not seen Psycho the whole way through, I don't think. But I think loads of people know Psycho.
See, that's the difference, because I absolutely love Psycho.
Okay.
It's one of my favourite films.
Okay.
I just recently read the book that it's based on as well. Yeah, fantastic read.
Plenty to chat about next week then.
Plenty to chat about. I'm really excited to watch it again, because I actually, having just read the book, I've not watched the film again since then. But.
Cool. Sounds good. Right. Well, we will see you next week, everyone. Have a happy remainder of Pride. Stay good. Look out for one another.
Yep.
And we will see you next week.
Remember, alone bad, friend good.
Alone bad, friend good.
Smoke good.
Also, smoke good.
Wine good.
See you next week, folks.
Bye-bye.